There is a specific kind of silence that settles over a room right before a family decides to destroy one of their own. It's not a peaceful quiet, it's heavy, calculated, and sharp. That was the exact silence filling my mother's grand dining room this past Thanksgiving. The mahogany table was crowded with fine china, a pristine 20-pound roasted turkey, and the smirking faces of the people who shared my DNA. My older brother, Richard, clinked his crystal wine glass with a silver spoon, standing up to command the room. He didn't look at the aunts, uncles, or influential neighbors gathered around us. He looked directly at me, sitting at the far end of the table in my faded flannel shirt and work boots. "Before we carve the turkey," Richard announced, his voice dripping with a sickening blend of pity and superiority, "we need to address the elephant in the room. Ethan, we all know you've been struggling. Your lifestyle, that rusted truck in the driveway, it's an embarrassment to our father's legacy. So as a family, we've decided to stage an intervention." He reached into his tailored suit jacket and slid a crisp printed piece of paper across the table, right next to the grocery store pumpkin pie I had brought. "It's an application for a night shift warehouse job, entry level. It pays $18 an hour. Sign it or leave this house. We won't tolerate a broke deadbeat ruining our reputation anymore." My mother, Eleanor, nodded coldly from the head of the table, her diamonds catching the chandelier light. "Listen to your brother, Ethan. I didn't raise a son to be a failure. If you can't contribute to this family's status, you don't belong at this table." The extended family stared down at their plates, some hiding smirks, others completely indifferent to my public execution. They expected me to break. They expected me to storm out in tears or beg for their mercy. What they didn't know was that the sleek black briefcase resting by the front door contained a stack of certified legal documents that would completely invert the universe we were sitting in. They thought they were casting out their broke, disappointing son. The truth was I had spent the last 6 months quietly buying up every single dollar of their toxic, defaulted family debt. To understand how we arrived at that dinner table, you have to understand the unspoken hierarchy of the Vance family. I am 32 years old, but for as long as I can remember, I was the designated scapegoat, while Richard was the golden child who could do no wrong. Our father had built a respectable mid-sized logistics and shipping company. From the time we were teenagers, Richard was groomed to inherit the executive suite. He was given corporate credit cards, Ivy League tuition, and a brand new sports car for his 16th birthday. I, on the other hand, was expected to work for every inch of my existence. While Richard attended high society galas with my mother, I was in the grease pits of our father's maintenance garage, learning the mechanics of the trucks from the ground up. I didn't mind the hard work. In fact, it gave me a quiet discipline that my brother completely lacked. But the emotional neglect left a scar. I spent my entire 20s desperately craving my mother's validation, trying to prove that I too was worthy of the Vance name. When our father unexpectedly passed away a decade ago, the true cracks in the foundation began to show. Richard immediately took over the presidency of the logistics company. He had no idea how to run a business, but he certainly knew how to spend its capital. Within 2 years, he had leased a fleet of luxury vehicles, upgraded to a sprawling estate, and married Vanessa, a woman whose caste for designer clothing was funded entirely by the company's operational accounts. During those chaotic early years, my mother would call me late at night, weeping over the phone. "Ethan, the company is facing a cash flow crisis," she would sob. "If we don't clear the past due property taxes and the emergency medical liens from your father's illness, the bank will seize everything. Please, you have to help us." Because I loved her, and because I still held a naive hope that my sacrifices would finally make her love me back, I worked 3 separate jobs. I was doing independent financial consulting by day, managing commercial properties by evening, and skipping meals to save every penny. Every single month, I quietly transferred half of my earnings directly into my mother's personal account. I drove a rusted 2012 Ford F-150, wore thrifted clothes, and lived in a tiny, cramped studio apartment just to ensure my family kept their mansion. I trusted them completely. I believed we were a team fighting to preserve our father's legacy. The illusion shattered 3 years ago at Richard's extravagant black tie wedding reception. I had arrived straight from a grueling 12-hour shift at a commercial site, wearing my only decent, albeit slightly worn, suit. As I walked toward the main hall, I passed the bridal suite and heard my mother's distinct, elegant laughter cutting through the heavy door. "Eleanor, how did you manage to pay for this 5-star catering?" Vanessa's voice asked from inside, dripping with admiration. "Richard told me the business accounts were completely frozen last month." My mother chuckled, a sound that made my stomach drop. "Oh, it was simple, darling. I just told Ethan the bank was foreclosing again. The poor boy is so desperate to please me, he virtually empties his bank account the moment I shed a tear. He thinks he's saving the family business, but really he's funding my country club memberships and this beautiful wedding. It's almost sad how easy he is to manipulate. He has no ambition, no style, just a reliable little workhorse." Richard's deep voice chimed in, filled with arrogant mockery. "Well, let him keep playing the martyr in his rusted truck. As long as he keeps handing over his cash to you, Mom, I don't care how broke and miserable he looks. Just make sure he stays in the back row during the photos. We can't have him ruining the aesthetic." I stood frozen in the dimly lit hallway, the ambient sound of the wedding music buzzing in my ears. The betrayal wasn't just a sudden blow, it was a profound, ice-cold realization that my entire adult life had been a lie. The late nights, the skipped meals, the financial anxiety I had endured to save them, it was all just a joke to them. They didn't see a devoted son or a supportive brother. They saw a gullible, low-class fool whose emotions could be harvested for quick cash. I didn't storm into the room. I didn't cause a scene. I walked out of the venue, got into my old truck, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Right then and there, I made a silent vow to myself. I was completely done giving them blind cash injections. I was going to draw an absolute, permanent boundary. The very next month, when my mother called me with her usual rehearsed tears about an unexpected utility crisis, I gave her a calm, firm answer. "No, Mom, I can't help you anymore. You'll have to figure it out with Richard." The shift in her tone was instantaneous. The soft, weeping mother vanished, replaced by a vicious, venomous stranger. "How dare you?" she shrieked through the phone. "After everything this family has done for you, you're going to hoard your little pennies and leave us to suffer? You are a selfish, ungrateful, broke disappointment. Don't bother calling me again until you're ready to be a real son." From that day forward, the family completely turned on me. They spent the next several years systematically branding me as the broke, selfish failure who abandoned his family in their hour of need. I chose absolute silence, letting them believe whatever lies comforted their fragile egos, but I didn't know what was coming next. For the next 3 years, the distance between us became a vast, echoing canyon. I was systematically erased from the family narrative. When my niece was born, I wasn't invited to the hospital, nor was I informed until weeks later via a cold, generic group text. My birthday came and went without a single message from my mother or brother. During the holidays, I would see photos posted on social media by Richard's wife, Vanessa. There they were, gathered around a massive Christmas tree or a lavish Easter brunch, dressed in matching designer sweaters, smiling like a picture-perfect American family. In the captions, Vanessa would write things like, "So blessed to be surrounded by the people who truly matter and support us." It was a passive-aggressive jab, a public confirmation that I had been cast out of the kingdom. Occasionally, an extended relative like Aunt Clara would call me, her voice filled with condescending pity. "Oh, Ethan, honey, I heard about your situation," she would say, sighing deeply. "Eleanor told us you're barely making ends meet, living in that awful little apartment and refusing to get a real career. It's such a shame. Richard is doing so well with the business, he just bought a third luxury SUV. Why can't you just swallow your pride, apologize to your mother, and ask Richard for a low-level job in the warehouse? Family is family, Ethan." I would just smile tightly through the phone and reply, "I'm doing just fine, Aunt Clara. Don't worry about me." The psychological toll of being the family pariah was immense, but I channeled every ounce of that emotional pain into my professional focus. I stopped trying to fix their lives and started building my own. I let their ignored calls and unanswered text messages become the fuel that drove my discipline. I thought that was the end of our dynamic, that we would just drift apart into permanent estrangement, but I was wrong. While my family was busy projecting an illusion of high society wealth, I was quietly executing a massive, low-profile career growth strategy. I founded Vance Acquisitions Group, an elite boutique private equity and debt restructuring firm. My philosophy was simple: buy up undervalued assets, restructure toxic corporate debt, and build true, unshakable wealth that operates in absolute silence. I didn't wear designer suits to impress people. I wore simple jeans and worked 14 hours a day from a modest, unpretentious office suite. By the time I turned 32, my firm was managing tens of millions of dollars in corporate assets. I had bought a beautiful, historic home on a large plot of land outside the city, paid for entirely in cash, though I still kept my old 2012 Ford F-150 as a daily driver. It reminded me of where I came from, and more importantly, it acted as a perfect filter. People who judged me based on my truck weren't worth my time. That was when everything changed. In early spring of 2026, my lead financial analyst walked into my office and laid a thick red portfolio on my desk. "Ethan, you need to look at this," he said, his face serious. "A secondary regional bank is looking to offload a massive block of highly toxic, severely delinquent debt. It belongs to a mid-sized logistics and shipping firm that's facing imminent foreclosure. The owner has been treating the company accounts like a personal piggy bank, maxing out millions in business lines of credit, defaulting on the primary building mortgage, and even taking out predatory secondary loans against his personal estate to fund a luxury lifestyle." I opened the folder. My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. There, stamped in bold black letters on the master registry, was the name of my father's old company, Vance Logistics, Inc. Attached to it were the personal guarantees signed by my brother, Richard, and the secondary property liens signed by my mother, Eleanor. They were completely, utterly bankrupted. The sports cars, the country club memberships, the designer clothes, it was all a house of cards built on a mountain of defaulted bank loans. The bank was preparing an aggressive public foreclosure that would have stripped the company from them and thrown my mother onto the street within 60 days. I sat in my office for 3 hours in absolute silence, staring out the window as the sun went down. I could have let the bank destroy them. I could have watched from the sidelines as their arrogance was publicly humbled by a federal bankruptcy court. But as I looked at my father's signature on the original founding documents inside that folder, I knew I couldn't let his life's work be dragged through the mud because of Richard's incompetence. I looked up at my analyst. "Buy it," I commanded, my voice calm and steady. "Buy 100% of the debt, the business lines, the personal property liens, the vehicle leases, all of it. Move it all under our master corporate registry." By the end of the month, Vance Acquisitions Group owned my family's entire existence on paper. They didn't owe money to the bank anymore. They owed every single cent to me.
I held the legal authority to evict them, seize their vehicles, and liquidate their assets with a single stroke of a pen. Yet I chose to wait. I wanted to see just how far their delusion would go. 6 months passed. I kept a tight legal lid on the debt acquisition, operating strictly through our corporate trustees, so my name never appeared on their monthly delinquency notices. Then, out of nowhere, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I received a text message from my mother. It was the first time she had initiated contact in over 2 years. "Ethan," the message read, "it has been a long time. Regardless of our past differences, Thanksgiving is a time for family unity. I am hosting the formal dinner at the main estate this year. Your aunts, uncles, and our closest neighbors will be there. I expect you to be present. Let's put your stubborn pride aside for one night." On the surface, it looked like an emotional olive branch, a desperate mother trying to reconcile with her estranged son. But as a financial strategist, I knew how to read between the lines. I knew that their debt was reaching its final maturity date right around late November. I suspected that they were feeling the walls close in, and they likely wanted me there either to beg me for another cash injection, or worse, to use me as a psychological punching bag to relieve their own immense hidden financial panic. "Are you really going to go?" my corporate attorney asked me the day before the holiday, looking over the thick manila legal folders I was packing into my leather briefcase. "I have to," I replied quietly, snapping the briefcase shut. "They invited me to their table. It's only polite that I bring the receipts." When I drove up the winding driveway of my mother's grand estate on Thanksgiving afternoon, the grass was perfectly manicured, and Richard's brand new luxury SUV was parked prominently in the front circle. To any outsider, this was a bastion of wealthy American success, but to me, it looked like a sinking ship dressed in holiday lights. I parked my old, faded truck right behind his gleaming vehicle, grabbed my briefcase, and walked up the front steps. The atmosphere inside the mansion was instantly suffocating. Vanessa gave me a fleeting, judgmental look before returning to her conversation with a wealthy neighbor. Richard patted my shoulder with an insincere, heavy hand, making a loud joke about how my flannel shirt looked like it had seen better days. My mother merely offered a cold, formal nod from across the room. Throughout the afternoon, the passive-aggressive comments flowed like wine. They spoke loudly about Richard's upcoming corporate expansion, their winter vacation plans to Aspen, and the exclusive charity galas they were attending. Every time I tried to speak about my own life, Richard would smoothly cut me off, steering the conversation back to his own manufactured triumphs. They were desperately maintaining the illusion, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already turned to sand. Then came the formal dinner. We all took our seats around the massive mahogany table. The room was filled with the clinking of heavy silverware and the rich scent of the roasted turkey, but as the main course was laid out, the pleasant facade completely vanished. Richard stood up, clinking his glass, and staged the brutal public intervention. "Sign this warehouse application or get out of this house before you ruin our reputation further," Richard sneered, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "We're just trying to help you, Ethan. It's pathetic seeing a man your age driving a piece of junk and living like a vagrant. You need real structure." "Your brother is throwing you a lifeline, Ethan," my mother Eleanor added, her face hardened into a mask of pure disappointment. "Your father would be ashamed to see you like this. Make a choice. Sign it or leave." I sat perfectly still at the end of the table. I didn't flinch, I didn't raise my voice. The entire room of extended family members stared at me, waiting for the broken scapegoat to finally shatter. Instead, a profound, ice-cold calmness washed over me. I looked at my mother, then at my brother. "You think this is your table, Richard?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly quiet yet carrying to every corner of the room. "You think this is your house, Mom?" Richard laughed, a harsh, defensive sound. "What are you talking about? Of course it's our house. I run the company that pays for this entire lifestyle, while you crawl around in the dirt." I slowly pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked over to the front door. I picked up my sleek black briefcase, walked back to the table, and set it down right next to the printed warehouse application. The room fell into a sudden, confused silence as I popped the brass latches of the briefcase. I smoothly pulled out a thick, certified legal folder and laid it flat on the mahogany table, right in front of my brother. "Richard, open to page 4, I said, my voice steady, professional, and devoid of any anger. "What in the hell is this, Ethan? I don't have time for your childish games," Richard snapped, though his eyes darted nervously to the corporate seal stamped on the cover. "Open it," I repeated, my tone shifting into that of an executive commanding a subordinate. With a frustrated sigh, Richard flipped the folder open. As his eyes scanned the first few paragraphs, his arrogant smirk completely froze on his face. The color began to drain from his cheeks, shifting from a confident flush to an ashen, deathly white. He began flipping through the pages rapidly, his hands starting to tremble violently as he saw the absolute deeds of debt assignment, the certified default notices from the secondary regional bank, and the master corporate registry of Vance Acquisitions Group. "What is it, Richard?" Vanessa asked, her voice cracking with sudden anxiety as she reached for the papers. "What does it say?" Richard couldn't speak. He looked up at me, his mouth slightly open, his eyes filled with a primal, suffocating terror. "I'll tell you what it says," I announced to the entire silent table. 6 months ago, Vance Logistics completely defaulted on its primary operating lines of credit. The regional bank was preparing a massive total asset liquidation. To prevent your father's name from being dragged through the bankruptcy courts by your staggering incompetence, Richard, my private equity firm privately stepped in. We bought 100% of your toxic debt. We bought the primary commercial mortgage, the vehicle leases on those luxury SUVs outside, and the secondary property liens on this very house. My mother, Eleanor, stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "That's impossible. The bank notices came from a firm called Vance Acquisitions." "I am the sole founder, owner, and majority shareholder of Vance Acquisitions, Mom." I fixed my eyes on her trembling form. "The bank didn't save you. I did. You haven't owned this house for 90 days. You are currently dining on my property, sitting in chairs owned by my firm, and eating a turkey paid for entirely by my corporate grace. You spent the last 3 years calling me a broke, selfish failure, but the truth is, I am quite literally your landlord." Vanessa dropped her wineglass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, a sharp, crystalline sound that broke the absolute paralysis of the room. She stared at the legal documents, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. Richard slammed his hands on the table, trying to summon a final ounce of his old authority, though his voice shook uncontrollably. "You can't do this, Ethan. We're blood. You can't just evict your own family." "I am not evicting you, Richard," I replied, leaning forward and placing my hands flat on the table, looking him dead in the eyes. An eviction would be an emotional, vindictive move, and unlike you, Richard, I don't make decisions based on fragile emotions. I make them based on cold, hard data. You are going to face real-world accountability.
The room remained in a state of absolute, breathless shock as I smoothly slid the printed warehouse application back across the table toward my brother. "You're going to need this job application, Richard," I said calmly, "because as of 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, my corporate trustees are initiating a strict, legally binding restructuring of Vance Logistics. You are being permanently stripped of your executive title and your corporate credit cards. The luxury SUVs are being liquidated to pay down the secondary interest lines. You will be assigned an actual entry-level position under a corporate trustee to slowly repay the debt you owe my firm. If you refuse, we foreclose, and you can find out what real poverty feels like."
I turned my gaze to my mother, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and a sudden desperate realization of who I actually was. She took a step toward me, her hands reaching out trembling. "Ethan, oh, my sweet boy, I didn't know. We were just worried about your future." "Save it, Mom," I interrupted, my voice perfectly soft yet completely unyielding. "You knew exactly what you were doing. For 10 years you used my love for you as a weapon to fund Richard's delusions. The moment I stopped letting you manipulate me, you cast me out. You don't get to play the loving mother now just because I hold the deed to your house." I picked up my briefcase, neatly arranged the remaining folders, and snapped the latches shut. I looked around the table one last time at the stunned, silent extended family members who had spent years treating me like an outcast. "Enjoy the rest of the dinner," I said quietly. "It's already been paid for." I turned and walked out of the formal dining room, my work boots echoing firmly against the marble hallway. As I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the crisp, cool autumn evening, a profound sense of absolute peace washed over me. The crushing weight of needing my mother's validation, the lingering childhood pain of being the family scapegoat, it was all completely gone, dissolved in the cool night air. I got into my old, faded 2012 truck, turned the key, and listened to the familiar, reliable rumble of the engine. I drove down the winding driveway without looking back in the rearview mirror. True success doesn't need a luxury sports car, a designer suit, or a loud public display of wealth to prove its worth. True wealth operates in absolute silence. Blood might make you related by birth, but loyalty, respect, and integrity are what define a true family. I had finally won my justice, not through malice or loud revenge, but through the quiet, unshakable power of truth.